Yeah. So greetings everyone. This is Ankit Saraf, General Secretary of Students Welfare Board. I am extremely privileged to have the opportunity to welcome you all to this important movement on behalf of all student community of IIT Guwahati. Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi has completed 20 years in 2021 as the head of a government, from becoming the Chief Minister of Gujarat in 2001 to being the Prime Minister of India in 2014 and re-elected as PM in 2019. In honor and celebration of this, a new book titled Modi at 20 Dreams Meet Delivery was launched at the grand event by the Honorable Vice President of India. Shri Narendra Modi served our country both at the state level as well as the national level. Today, we are on a transformative path, and it is needless to say that it has been carefully led by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. There is no doubt that his journey is an inspiration for every individual. First of all, I would like to offer my regards and gratitude towards the director of IIT Guwahati, Professor T.G. Sitaram. It is a particular honor and privilege to have Professor Shamika Ravi, Vice President Economic Policy (ORF), for an expert address on Modi at 20. Ma'am, I welcome you on behalf of whole IITG student community. I would now like to request Director Sir to welcome Shamika ma'am. Okay. Sir would like to say something on this. Yeah.
Very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, a warm welcome to Professor Shamika Ravi to this event at IIT Guwahati. I think all of you may be knowing Professor Ravi has actually contributed a chapter in this book at Modi at 20, Dreams Meet Delivery. She is one of the author. So really we are privileged, madam, to have you here. And it's an occasion of celebration because 20 years in one's lifetime, it's a very long period. And our Honorable Prime Minister started 2001 as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, completed 20 and odd years, and several distinguished people from the public life whom he had interacted or they had a chance to know him very closely have written and contributed the chapters in this book. I had a chance to go through the book, a lot of statistics. So instead of me talking about it, I have actually requested two of my colleagues, Professor Sharma, the head Humanities and Social Sciences, and also Professor Pahi Saikia, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to present on behalf of the profile. And both of them actually have gone through the book much more rigorously than me. And also we requested one of the student leader, Mr. Mohit Mishra, who was a former Vice President of Jamkhana 2 years back. And he is a research scholar in EEE, Electrical and Electronics Engineering at IIT Guwahati, and presently pursuing his PhD program. He also is a young fellow, he has a lot of ambition in this direction. And he also went through this book, and he is also giving his views from a younger generation about what Modi, Honorable Prime Minister Modi, has achieved during the last 20 years. It's more than the achievement of Honorable Prime Minister. I think how India has transformed in these 20 years. That's most important to know. I think we are all very anxious to listen to all of you. And then, at the end, concluding, an expert address by Professor Ravi would be there. We would like to know more from her about the entire, the experiences, as well as how this book was formed also. Maybe she would give us more idea on this. Without much ado, I once again welcome all of you to this event, and I thank everyone who have assembled here to listen to these talks. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to welcome Professor Sukanya Sharma to present her views on it.
Good evening, respected Director Sir, Professor Sitaram, our invited guest, Professor Shamika Ravi from Observer Research Foundation, dear colleagues and student friends. I titled my presentation as with a line which I thought was somehow summarizing the very basic concept of what Prime Minister Modi have been trying to convey to the country. We must remember who we are. I think that is somewhere which makes us feel that we belong to a part of the world. In a way, for 400 years we were told maybe what we spoke, what we followed as a religion, what we wore as a dress was improper. And there were colonizers who came to civilize us. Out of that, when we had this long struggle for freedom and we achieved it, it is just 75 years and we are still struggling with this whole makeover of a very ancient nation, in fact, which stretched from the plateau of Iran, maybe the cultural nation that is India, the Persian gateway, to major parts of South Asia, moving back to Southeast Asia, beyond Indonesia. Now, when this book was titled Dreams Meet Delivery, somebody who dreamt for very long years, Bharat Yatra was something which he had undertaken during his formative years as a very active member of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. So there he had visited states and districts of the country and had looked upon people, have looked upon issues very closely as a commoner. Between us, he said, between all of us, he sort of participated in a way which was very much similar to the common citizen's dreams. And that's when he sat on the chair, when he sort of started holding the reins, he started delivery. So I have this Time magazine picture right in the beginning of his journey. And when it says, why Modi matters. And if you see the look of both the images, if you look at Modi in the Time magazine picture, Prime Minister Modi, you see him straight looking into the camera where he was trying to prove himself, standing tall. And the world needs India to step up as a global power 1 year in. Can Prime Minister Narendra Modi deliver? So the talk was still on. And then 20 years down, there is Dreams Meet Delivery. So the book is a compilation of 21 articles published by Rupa Publications, India. And the period from 2001, the period of 20 years at head of government at the state and national level is covered in the book. And but the book covers the whole experiential journey of Shri Modi from the age of 17, the Bharat Yatra I mentioned just now, a mission he set of knowing himself, which is also referred in this book as his university, that whole Bharat Yatra, his country, and finally defining the mission of transforming India. It has 435 pages and divided into 5 sections thematically. There are 5 themes, and the first theme, people first, I think is something which is again making Indian democracy very powerful. It is the power of numbers. It is the power of votes, which is the most important thing for a political leader in a democracy. That is what Modi has. And that is what actually makes him like unchallengeable or cannot be challenged maybe till now. The politics of unity and development, where it is that when it is culture, when we are talking about similarities between ourselves, but then we have different types of, or we have like elite states and non-elite states, the type of communication that he is trying to make with the northeastern part of India, with Kashmir, the type of dialogues, the type of discourses. So you find here in the chapters, the way they are divided actually is talking about his primary, what is called his primary, what he has delivered. Jan Dhan, an economy for everyone, a new paradigm in governance, and ending with Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, India and the world. So this is what I think is very important for us to know, that he comes with a power which is, as it is said, became the first prime minister in nearly 50 years to win a majority in successive parliamentary elections. So he has this appeal, and the margin of votes, 5.7 lakh voters. So his whole attempt has been the way he has built up. It's not a overnight journey. It is not something which has happened out of some type of event, an assassination of a former prime minister, or maybe the other reasons of the fall of the government, which so many of his predecessors, actually the ones who came to, who sat on the chair. So the major highlights of the book are the Youth Connect, which I think our student friend, Mr. Mohit Mishra, is going to, because the conversations that we were having, he was very clear about it. Women empowerment, I think, is an area which certain aspects which Modi ji came out to talk about was unbelievable, that with the existing taboos, anybody in India would go to the extent of talking about menstrual hygiene, would go to the extent of toilets, building toilets, and how he actually did not only just stand by making schemes. He also used popular media, the Bollywood films which came out, which is very, very influential in India, which did the advertisements, the public messages that were sent out. Bottom-up approach to eradicate poverty. The Jan Dhan schemes that will be dealt with by the speakers again. The other issue that I would also like to dwell upon a little more, cultural revival and integrating technology in day-to-day governance. Now, while the book begins with a foreword by Lata Mangeshkar, who the first line says, I consider myself blessed to be born in a nation that is as timeless. And by sided, mine is a Xerox copy, but if you look at the book, there is a picture of Modi ji sitting, it's a sketch, with the Himalayas in the background and portraying, displaying timelessness, and that is what is India. She goes on to say that how he turns development, India's development journey, into a mass movement, and how he actually learned the nuances of an impressive track record, that is what she writes, as a chief minister, which also enabled him to understand the nuances of government. So step by step, he has built up himself. The whole aspect of how he brought in this whole issue of one nation with equal rights, which is in page number 41, where the possible transformation with likely enactment of the Uniform Civil Code, no more Article 370. That was something which I think a lot of us from our core of our hearts we were wanting. And also on 6 December 2018, with coincidentally Modi as Prime Minister, but it is not a coincidence, maybe it is the atmosphere which was generated which made it possible. The court ruled unanimously that Section 377 was unconstitutional insofar as it criminalizes consensual sexual conduct between adults of the same sex. Now, this was massive, and it took India ahead of many other nations of the world. And this is where actually, again, this whole thing about that our past, we have many of these characters, we have many respectable in our epics, characters who were actually given very, positions, honorable positions, but a condition which happened to us in 400 years taught us the reverse. As a result of which, what happened was that it was criminalized. So the Section 377, the removal of it, of the which criminalized gay sex, saying that it violated constitutional right to equality and dignity, was something which was again massive. This whole effect again of what is there in page number 47, where I took the title, we must remember what we are. This, how he brought yoga into, or rather took it to the world. At a time when, this is in page number 64, at a time when divisive forces are raising their ugly heads, this has been India's great contribution to the world. We have successfully unified the whole world through yoga. Just as yoga unifies mind, body, and soul, it is also unifying people across the world. It is a fact today. So, these are certain things like where culture is upstream, all else. That is what Amish Tripathi writes in page number 65. The culture of a nation cascades down to politics, business, international relations, even interpersonal relations, which otherwise was completely two different areas. So when Michael Cernier was taken in as a cultural anthropologist in the World Bank in 1971, so many actually scoffed at the World Bank, which till then was a monolithic structure of economists, or maybe some few political scientists. But when it was people's lives which mattered with development, and that was when they started forming policies which was talking about people who received them and also people who developed those policies or technologies. Amish Tripathi ends this chapter by writing, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is bringing our culture back to the center of our lives and consciousness. I think that is a contribution of Prime Minister Modi which will linger, which in the 75 years we had doubts if we can really do it, if it is really our culture which can give us strength. I would go to page number, so this is about when I was showing this Fit India movement, the way he tries to talk about how a good, healthy body will also generate a good, healthy mind. This whole fitness reach in every school, colleges, university, these are long lasting. Maybe the benefits of it we will reap in another 50 years, maybe not today. Maybe today there are schemes, maybe today we are having problems in implementing them. It will take time, but it will happen. It can deliver. Now that faith, that type of conviction, commitment that the individual has, again, is not something which has happened to him in a period of even, or overnight, or maybe just when he joined politics. To do it, he has built up himself over the years. So just not 20 years. For these 20 years, he had worked for 40 years. Now that makes it so very important. And Amit Shah ji, he writes in page number 77, the mechanism that he has now of winning elections, the personal connection with every state and every region is a precious gift which Modi ji has. To understand it, one must go back to Modi even before 2001, to his apprenticeship and to the ceaseless, untiring Bharat Yatra of that period, with a watchful eye, a listening ear, and an open mind. That tapasya was his real life university. That made, and that is the individual, the persona, is something that is what gives him all the strength to do things which today we might feel, or we have been feeling, could never have been talked about. So when he Varanasi was one of the cities that he chose to be elected to the parliament, which was a challenge from many sides. It was also important for him politically. But there, in page number 81, the whole campaign that was there, just one line which was which I thought was very powerful, which Amit Shah ji writes, describing the situation. Unmindful of how physically taxing this may be, the campaign, he is always there for public meetings and campaign rallies. He never say no. Quite to the contrary, he goes beyond the call of expectation. I still remember the final days of the Uttar Pradesh election of 2017. We were in Varanasi and Purvanchal, Eastern UP, for the last stage of what had been a grueling campaign. Modi got down to street level, house to house, canvassing like any other constituency MP and party activist. This was inspirational for BJP workers who now redoubled their efforts. The commander had come down to the trenches, and he led us to a famous victory. The national leader's local impact was there for all to see. This has forever, I think, made Indian politics, or rather we had a prime minister to whom we could actually connect. So beyond the political schemes, beyond the economic schemes, beyond what is being expected from him to deliver, human politics, which is Modi's mantra, that by paying heed to Gandhi's talisman, this is in page number 91, always take decisions keeping in mind the last man in the queue. Modi delivered transformative schemes during his very first tenure as Prime Minister. Humanity has been the core of his leadership. For instance, he understood the plight of women who had to bear the humiliation of open defecation or suffer in smoke-filled kitchens, toilet in every house under Swachh Bharat, and gas connections under Ujjwala scheme. So the way this whole transformation has happened, I will end by saying that he is also trying to build a legacy of people who will take care of it after him, after them. So he has encouraged. In Gujarat, he did that. Modi encouraged professionals, that is Pradeep Gupta in page number 97, professionals and eminent citizens to join politics through the BJP. Since 2014, Modi has facilitated the entry of innumerable professionals and technocrats in active electoral politics. And as you can see here, this whole, since 2014, the setting up of IITs, IIMs, the country now has 23 IITs and 20 IIMs across the country, because starting from the time of, if you quote Swami Vivekananda, education matters. As a result of this, the number of students in higher education has gone up significantly, and also a record number of 71 Indian universities have made it to the World University Rankings in 2021. And there are 3 Indian universities who have achieved top 200 positions in the QS World Rankings. Now, this was something which till a few years back would not matter to us because none of us were there. So now it is something which is very much achievable. And you can see the way he connects. He visits these institutions. He talks with its faculty members, people who run the institutions very closely. He interacts. I borrowed this picture from from Director Sir. So this was in IISc Bangalore. And this is also there in internet, but I got it somewhere from one of my colleagues. This is in Dholavira. I am an IT archaeology, that's close to how he interacts with them so closely. And he has been to the field, so it's not just in policy and papers. The way he connects, the way he tries to matters, and that is where that is how the transformation has happened. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Dr. Pahi Saikia, Assistant Professor, Department of HSS, to address the audience.
A very good afternoon to you all. Professor T.G. Sitaram, our Honorable Director, distinguished guest, Professor Shamika Ravi. We are very glad to have you here, ma'am. Other dignitaries, dear colleagues, friends, and staff members. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm really thankful to the organizers, especially Professor Sitaram and also the student representatives who made this happen and who also felt that and believed in me to be a part of this program. Thank you very much for making me a part of this initiative. I think the subject of today's discussion, as I have put it in the slide, is Modi at the rate 20, which is of course a compilation of several articles, as our previous speaker, Professor Sukanya Sharma, has already laid out in greater detail. And these articles have been authored by eminent personalities ranging from intellectuals, academics, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, to name just a few. As a cover page of the book reflects, and you can see that it is the journey of Prime Minister Modi. And I would say that this is not just a compilation of articles, but as a student of political science and international relations, I'd like to highlight that, when we talk about a leader, particularly a leader that heads the government of a country, we say that he or she is trying to construct the identity of a particular country. And this is exactly what we have seen since India's independence. In the past several years, since Prime Minister Modi has taken over, as the Prime Minister and as the head of the government of India, and prior to that as the head of the state of Gujarat, I think India has been trying to create its own identity and construct a niche, carve a niche of its own in the global arena of global politics. So that's how I have tried to frame my understanding about Prime Minister Modi's journey and vis-a-vis India's journey, our journey towards a new direction, towards a transformative approach that I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes. So having said that, one of the major objectives, the other two pictures I have taken from one of the sections in the book, where you have a section of wonderful pictures that reflects this particular journey about India. The reason why we have gathered today is not just about the discussion, and I think we are going to carry it forward. this book, when I read several chapters, I went into the depth of reading most of the chapters, and some of the chapters, of course, they are beyond my domain, so I tried to just go through them, but I'll have a lot to learn from our speaker today, who is an eminent economist. I've seen your chapter with a lot of statistics and data. That's really something that we need to talk about. And many chapters in this book, they have very rich data with a lot of analysis. I think that's something, it's a takeaway for me as a student of a particular discipline. And I think this creates, or rather it allows the space to create a public discourse. It's not just talking about the schemes, but I think from now on we are probably taking this discussion to the public discourse, and this is the beginning. Talking about a book in institutions and the policies and schemes, it's actually bringing the public and the state leaders into a dialogue, and that's very, very important for us to do. Otherwise, they just lay on the paper and then they're just there, and people at large, as you see, the ordinary citizen at large, they just know what the schemes are, but they do not know how this transition or the transformation happens. What is the journey towards making those schemes? I think that's very important for us to understand. So I'll try my best to do justice to the authors. It's very difficult to review the articles written by experts, but I'll try my best to do whatever possible in the next couple of minutes. Section 4, as you see, has been titled as A New Paradigm in Governance, and it consists of 8 chapters written by very eminent personalities like Ajay Mathur, Ashok Gulati, Nandan Nilekani, to name just a few. The focus of this part of the book is on governance, and I have just titled it as Transformative Approaches because that's what I found very striking in this part of the book. And this part, including the previous sections, I think Professor Shamika Ravi would also talk about it, highlights a lot about the inclusionary practices. As development practitioners and as students of development studies, we always talk about something, development, which should be inclusionary. But then we never translate, we try and translate that into action in numerous ways. And this is one of the ways that we have been trying to do so. And the articles in this particular section talk about the inclusionary practices that the Modi government has emphasized through various schemes and policies from time to time. There's this chapter on economy and environment, which has been written by Ajay Mathur. And this particular chapter draws on the synergistic linkages, as you can see there on the slide. Synergistic linkages and the convergence between ecology, economy, and economic development. Now, this has been questioned because when you talk about, large-scale development processes and outcomes, there is always going to be an impact on the environment and ecology. And there is also this politics of contestation that happens at different levels. So when this particular chapter sheds new light to understand that there can be a synergy. There can be a synergy between ecology, environment, and its protection, and economic development at the same time. There is also a mention about traditional approaches towards development, which needs to be understood, particularly in a country like India. And I think to a certain degree we can understand and also try to agree that there are some of the traditional knowledge practices that we need to re-articulate in order to understand India's development goals for the next decades or for the next coming decades. The chapter on economy and environment, I think it also talks about the possible convergence, as I have said, between a resilient economy, because we need a resilient economy, and India is moving towards a resilient economy, and the viable use of technology and, ecology and environment. The model of convergence, as we may call it, has been demonstrated by a lot of programs, schemes, and policies. And some of these schemes, particularly the National Solar Mission, has been very, very successful. I am not from the field, but I have spoken to some of the physicists, my colleagues in the institution, and I was trying to understand what the scheme is about. And my dialogue and my conversation has taught me that this is one of the things that India can talk about today, perhaps. And the National Solar Mission is one of the greatest achievements that India has had. The author, and I will quote this particular sentence because I found it very striking, the author notes that as Prime Minister Modi dramatically increased the goal of the National Solar Mission from 20,000 megawatt of solar power to be achieved by 2020 to 100,000 megawatt to be achieved by 2022. That's an immense step that has been taken by India. And this change was brought about in 2014 and immediately resulted in sea change in the thinking of all the stakeholders, including regulators and the state power departments. And I think most of us know that his experience of being the Chief Minister of Gujarat and his experience in this kind of the question of how to conserve energy and also to talk about renewable sources of energy has been immensely it has been an example that India has already been talking about, and we have experienced during his chief ministership as well. The other important schemes that have been discussed in this chapter and the book is the Ujala and the Amrut, or the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. These are the major schemes that India had taken. Amrut was launched in 2015, catering to 500 major cities, covering almost 60% of the urban population. And under the scheme, 11.4 million water tap connections have been provided, taking total connections to 41.4 million in Amrut cities. That's very impressive. The other important thing that we can talk about and that has been highlighted in this chapter as well is the India's new decade, which is also called New India's Decade, and it's there everywhere in the ministry websites as well. So I took it from there. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. And this is more or less about what we see here, technology and democratic governance. We are talking about one of the largest democracies in India with a lot of human, resources that needs to be tapped, especially young resources that needs to be tapped. The BharatNet scheme is an important scheme that has been discussed extensively. Prime Minister Modi's government launched the BharatNet scheme to transform the country into a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. Since 2014, we have seen that more than 150,000 village panchayats have been connected with optical fiber networks under this scheme. I think this is a beginning of a bottom-up approach. We saw the beginning in 1993, definitely, when we made villages a part of the larger democracy, when we set up the electoral mechanism so that people could directly participate at the grassroots level and connect to the people at the topmost level. But I think this is something which we have been wanting, the technology part, and its connection and its important linkages with democratic governance, and this is one of the important schemes. Common service centers, this has also been set up. It's a very, very important step, and these are physical facilities for delivering Government of India e-services to rural and remote locations in India. As of August 2021, the Government of India set up 356,000 CSCs across the country to bridge the gap between state and its citizens. So you can see the amount of coverage that we have had through these kinds of schemes and services. Another important initiative has been the e-rupee, as you all know, a specific digital payment solution which was launched in August 2021. By the end of December 2021, we see that there has been another mission, which is the National Digital Health Mission. 146.7 million health IDs have been generated under this particular mission. NDAR, which is the National Digital Educational Architecture, though through the use of information and communication technology, has been another important initiative. There is another important chapter which I found very striking. I'm not going to discuss this in detail. If you are interested, you can read. Some of us work on education, agriculture, and especially we have people from the rural technology. I don't know if anybody is there. from that center. But yes, there is a lot of data in this particular chapter. I thought I'll pull out one of these pictures and the graphs that talks about, it's a comparison of agricultural performance between Gujarat and other states. And the period of comparison is, as you can see, 2001 to 2002, and then again to 2013 to 2014. And this duration was taken to account for variations in rainfall. Gujarat's agricultural performance registered the highest growth rate, I think 9.2% per annum, among all major states of India. This is something that will particularly motivate our young researchers to do more research on a comparative basis among other states in India. Now, the fifth chapter, which is almost the last part of my presentation today, it talks about India's foreign policy, and it has been titled Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as Professor Sukanya Sharma has already mentioned, India and the World. There are 3 chapters written by Ajit Doval, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Manoj Ladwa, and Bharat Barai. And as you can see, the names, they suggest that there is a lot of experiences that I've gathered over the years of their service in India in different positions. And this particular section, it tells us that India's historical underpinning, as we see, is something that tells more about internationalism. Since Nehru's days, we've been talking about internationalism. But the way that in the recent decades, India has been able to reconstruct its identity in the global arena, I think that's something which also allows us to have more dialogue on what we call India's grand, ambitious strategy in foreign policy. Some of the highlights of this chapter is, the Pakistan policy, as I have laid out there, 2014 onwards, the Uri attack policy, or the policy on the Uri 2014, Myanmar 2015, Doklam 2017, and Ladakh 2020. And this is mostly related to terrorism and border issues, how to control these particular problems at the international and the domestic and, internal and international security level. Resilient infrastructure has been one of the also focus areas of the government of India, where we have been focusing on creating border roads or building border roads in critical sectors. If you travel to the remotest corners or the border regions of either in Northeast India, or if you go to Ladakh, you will see border roads have been one of the critical areas, not just in terms of resilient infrastructure, but also the presence of state. It tells us about how the state is becoming more, visible in those conditions, in the remotest conditions of the country. And some of the areas that I have traveled in Northeast, particularly in the Myanmar region, as well as in Arunachal, close to the China borders, I think that tells a lot about the resilient infrastructure. The border roads in critical sectors. Technologies. International Solar Alliance. I think these are also some of the important, discussions that is going on in this particular section. Now, Heart of Asia Conference, as I have titled here, was held in Amritsar. What does it tell? It says that, India has been trying to shape its narrative, not just at the level of Delhi, but I think it's crossing the boundaries of this capital city and going to different corners, particularly at the federal level. So there is a linkage between the federal structure and beyond the state capital to sort of internationalize many of these engagements that we are having at the regional and the cross-regional level. Diasporas have become a geopolitical and geoeconomic strength of India, which is being discussed by one of the chapters very eloquently, I would say. Neighborhood first policy, the Indo-Pacific, Quad, maritime security, these are important areas of concerns that we'll see have been discussed. There are also other, important focus areas like coordinated national security apparatus and intelligence greed, risk-taking at the highest level, the aerial strikes. I think these are major interventions that the Indian government have made as far as the national security or coordination of the national security apparatus is concerned. The PMGSY has been one of the important schemes where we have covered 2019 to 2020, 11,400 kilometers. We have had a lot of air connectivity through regional air connectivity schemes. The defense sector reforms have taken place. Most importantly, internal security has been highly connected with India's national security. So we see that a lot of talks and negotiations have been going on with different insurgent groups in the northern sector as well as in the far east of India. Talks with the Nagas, the Bodos, the NLFT in Tripura, and among other groups. Last but not the least, we see that India's national security goals vis-a-vis West Asia, vis-a-vis the BIMSTEC, vis-a-vis other sub-regional cooperation and the cooperative mechanisms have been going on with full force, and I'm sure that we have a lot of hope and aspirations as ordinary citizens from the government, and a lot of engagements that we need in terms of people-to-people contact and delivery, not just at the government level, but also the connections that we're trying to build up at different levels. With these few words, I would like to thank you all once again, and I'm looking forward to listening to Professor Shamika Ravi. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Mohit Mishra, Research Scholar, IITGuwahati, to address the audience.
सभी लोगों को नमस्कार। आदरणीय डायरेक्टर प्रोफेसर टी सीताराम जी और प्रोफेसर शमिका रवि जी, वाइस प्रेसिडेंट ORF, और अन्य प्रोफेसर और हमारे प्रिय साथियों, आज मेरे लिए ये गौरव का विषय है कि मुझे अपने विचारों को रखने के लिए आप सभी के मध्य में बुलाया गया। इसके लिए मैं तहे दिल से ऑर्गेनाइजर्स का और IIT गुवाहाटी के डायरेक्टर का धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करता हूँ। दो 2014 में मोदी जी ने जब कार्यभार संभाला तो उसके बाद जो परिवर्तन हुए, एक युवा उसको कैसे देखता है, और मैंने उन छोटी छोटी सी चीज़ों को किस तरीके से देखा है, क्योंकि मैं ग्रामीण अंचल से आता हूँ। और जब प्रधानमंत्री जी 2014 में प्रधानमंत्री कार्यालय पहुँचे तो उससे पहले अगर हम उनके जीवन पर एक प्रकाश डालें तो एक लंबा जीवन उन्होंने RSS के प्रचारक के रूप में समाज कार्य करते हुए पूरे भारत में भ्रमण किया है। तो जब भारत भ्रमण किया है तो उन्होंने आम जन की क्या समस्याएं हैं उनको बारीकी से समझने का कोशिश किया है। उसमें से एक समस्या थी जिसके बारे में कोई भी बात नहीं करना चाहता था, कोई भी सरकार उसको ओपन डिस्कशन के लिए ओपन नहीं हो रहा था। उसके बारे में अगर हम बात करें तो खुले में जो शौच की समस्या थी वो एक बहुत बड़ी समस्या थी। मैं अपने एक्सपीरियंस आपके साथ शेयर करता हूँ। खुले में शौच हम कहाँ जाते हैं? खेतों में जाते हैं। कई बार खेतों में ऐसी फसल होती है जिसमें खेतों में पानी भरा होता है, जैसे धान का फसल का जब मौसम होता है तो खेत भी नहीं बचते हैं। तो उस समय कहाँ पे शौच के लिए आप जाओगे? तो सिर्फ रोड और पगडंडी बचती है और उस पर कोई ना कोई आता जाता रहता है। उस समय महिलाओं और माताओं बहनों को कितना कष्ट होता था। यह एक ऐसी समस्या थी जिसके बारे में प्रधानमंत्री जी ने सार्वजनिक मंच से आह्वान किया कि इस समस्या को आओ मिलकर ख़त्म करते हैं। और मैं आपको बताना चाहूँगा कि 2014 में ग्रामीण अंचल में सिर्फ 38% हाउस होल्ड में टॉयलेट्स और लेटरिन्स थे, और खुले में शौच का प्रतिशत भारत में 40% था, जो उस समय के वर्ल्ड एवरेज 12% से कितना ज़्यादा था। और आज जब मैं स्टैटिक्स पर एक नज़र डालता हूँ और देखता हूँ कि खुले में शौच की समस्या का ऑलमोस्ट अंत हो चुका है और लगभग 10.9 करोड़ जो टॉयलेट्स हैं उनका निर्माण किया गया है। प्राइमरी स्कूल्स में की अगर हम बात करें तो ऐसी दशा थी जिसको अगर मैं कहूँ टॉयलेट्स के मामले में तो दुर्दशा, वहाँ पर गर्ल्स के लिए सेपरेट वर्किंग टॉयलेट्स नहीं थे। 16,000 से ज़्यादा स्कूल्स में सेपरेट टॉयलेट्स, वो वर्किंग टॉयलेट्स का अरेंजमेंट करना, ये एक छोटी छोटी समस्या थी। अगर हम इसके ऊपर विस्तृत से प्रकाश डालें तो पाएंगे कि इन सब छोटे छोटे इनिशिएटिव्स की वजह से गर्ल्स का स्कूल में ड्रॉप आउट रेट काफ़ी कम हुआ है। 2015 में प्रधानमंत्री जी ने जनधन, आधार और मोबाइल जैम के बारे में अपने विचारों को रखते हुए एक बात बोली थी, मैक्सिमम वैल्यू फॉर एवरी रुपी, मैक्सिमम एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ द पुअर एंड मैक्सिमम पेनिट्रेशन ऑफ द टेक्नोलॉजीज टू द पीपल। अभी इसको स्टेप बाय स्टेप कैसे रियलाइज करना है उनके दिमाग में, या उन्होंने जो भी एक्सपीरियंस एज ए चीफ मिनिस्टर ऑफ गुजरात 12 साल बिताए थे, उनके दिमाग में एक खाका था। जब उन्होंने प्रधानमंत्री का कार्यभार संभाला तो उन्होंने एक प्रेजेंटेशन मांगा कि देश में ऐसे कितने गांव हैं जहां पर बिजली नहीं पहुंची है, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी नहीं पहुंचा है अभी तक। तो डाटा आया कि 18,000 से ऊपर गांव हैं, 18,500 के आसपास ऐसे गांव हैं जहां तक अभी भी बिजली के तार खींचे जाने हैं। प्रधानमंत्री कैसे कल्पना कर सकते हैं कि उस गांव का आदमी मोबाइल यूज करेगा जहां पर बिजली नहीं पहुंचेगी। उन्होंने 1000 दिन का लक्ष्य रखा कि 1000 दिन के अंदर जिन गांवों में बिजली नहीं है उन गांवों को बिजली के तारों से कनेक्ट किया जाए। और मेरा मानना है कि बिजली का उस गांव में पहुंचना, इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन ऑफ विलेज सिर्फ इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन ऑफ विलेज नहीं था, वो इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन ऑफ होप्स था वहाँ के रहने वाले लोगों के लिए। इसके बाद जनधन अकाउंट खोलने की घोषणा प्रधानमंत्री जी ने 2014 में 15 अगस्त इंडिपेंडेंस डे के कार्यक्रम के दौरान की थी। तो उस समय जब गांव का आदमी किसी बैंक में जाता था तो उसको पहले तो डर लगता था और प्रक्रिया बहुत जटिल थी। तो जब प्रधानमंत्री जी ने घोषणा की कि जिन भी परिवारों के पास एक भी बैंक अकाउंट नहीं है, ऐसे परिवारों को आइडेंटिफाई किया जाए और जनधन अकाउंट मतलब जीरो बैलेंस के साथ उनके अकाउंट खोले जाएं, तो हम आश्चर्य करेंगे स्टैटिस्टिक्स को देखकर कि जनवरी 2015 से मार्च 2015 के बीच में ही 30 करोड़ से ज़्यादा बैंक अकाउंट खोले गए। वो लोग जिन्हें बहुत जटिल समस्याओं का सामना करना पड़ता था ऑफिशियल प्रोसीडिंग्स में, बैंक मैनेजर उनके घर पर आ रहे हैं तो उन्हें उस समय एक बदलाव नज़र आया कि कुछ तो बदल रहा है, लेकिन उन्हें यह पता नहीं था कि ये बैंक अकाउंट क्यों खोले जा रहे हैं। और आज अगर हम देखें, पॉलिसीज पर नज़र डालें तो 320 से ज़्यादा ऐसी स्कीम हैं जिनमें डायरेक्ट कैश ट्रांसफ़र हो रहा है उन्हीं अकाउंट में जो जनवरी 2015 और उसके बाद और प्रधानमंत्री जी के उद्बोधन के बाद 15 अगस्त 2014 के बाद खोले गए हैं। मैं ग्रामीण अंचल से आता हूँ। मैं ग्रामीण अंचल में जो लोकेटेड स्कूल्स हैं, मेरी पढ़ाई वहाँ से हट के थोड़े दूसरे स्कूल में हुई है जिसको हम जवाहर नवोदय विद्यालय के नाम से जानते हैं। और मुझे खुशी की बात है मेरे लिए इस बात को साझा करना आप लोगों के साथ कि 2019 और 20 में उस समय के एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर ने 5000 एडिशनल सीट जवाहर नवोदय विद्यालय को परमिट किया कि आप 5000 सीट और बढ़ाइए, क्योंकि इन स्कूलों ने ग्रामीण अंचलों में लोगों के सपनों को उम्मीदें दी हैं। और उसके बाद 23 और नवोदय विद्यालय उन्होंने खोलने का निर्णय लिया। ये छोटी छोटी सी स्कीम थी, लेकिन अगर हम इनके प्रभाव के बारे में देखें तो इनका प्रभाव बहुत दूरगामी है, जिनको अभी से कह पाना बहुत मुश्किल है। एक यूथ होने के नाते सारे यूथ उनके कंधों के ऊपर जिम्मेदारी ज़्यादा होती है, तो वो कोई ना कोई रोजगार या कोई ना कोई नौकरी के लिए एप्लीकेशन फाइल करते हैं। मैं अपना एग्जाम्पल बताता हूँ। जब मैंने IIEEE के लिए फॉर्म भरा था तो उस समय एक प्रक्रिया थी, गजेटेड ऑफिसर से मुझे उसको सत्यापित करके उस फॉर्म को भेजना होता था। लेकिन अगर हम देखें कि उस प्रक्रिया का कोई मतलब था, वो कितनी प्रासंगिक थी, मेरे हिसाब से तो नहीं थी। क्योंकि जब मैं एडमिशन लिया अपने कॉलेज में IIEEE के बाद, तो वहाँ पे पूर्ण रूपेण मेरे कागजों का, डिग्री का, डिप्लोमा का, सबका सत्यापन होना ही था। तो फिर उस समय एक गजेटेड ऑफिसर के सिग्नेचर क्यों चाहिए? तो जब प्रधानमंत्री जी ने ये स्टेप लिया तो मेरे जैसे कितने युवाओं को लगा कि उनकी जो समस्या थी प्रधानमंत्री जी ने कहीं ना कहीं महसूस की है और आज उस समस्या को जड़ से खत्म करने का निर्णय लिया है। मैं एक बात बोलना चाहता हूँ कि एक सक्सेसफुल नेता वही होता है जिसको बहुत जल्दी ये समझ में आ जाता है कि आप तब तक नेता हैं जब तक लोग आपको नेता मानते हैं। और ये बात हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी के छोटे से छोटे आचरण में मुझे देखने को मिलती है। एक और बात पर मैं थोड़ा सा प्रकाश डालना चाहता हूँ। नॉर्थ ईस्ट में और देश के अन्य भागों में बहुत सारे इंसर्जेंट ग्रुप काम कर रहे थे। उन इंसर्जेंट ग्रुप्स के साथ शांति समझौता करना नेशनल इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी के लिए कितना फ़ायदेमंद हुआ है। जैसे हम नॉर्थ ईस्ट की बात करें, यहाँ पे मेघालय में आचिक नेशनल वॉलंटियर काउंसिल था, त्रिपुरा में NLFTSD और बोडो ग्रुप्स, उनके साथ सरकार ने हिम्मत दिखाया और शांति समझौता किया। उसी का परिणाम है कि आज आसाम से 23 जिलों से सशस्त्र बल विशेषाधिकार कानून को पूर्णतः हटा लिया गया है और एक में आंशिक रूप से हटाया गया है और मेघालय से भी एफएसपा को उठा लिया गया है। ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस की बात करें तो 2014 में हम 144वें स्थान पर थे और आज अगर हम ईज ऑफ डूइंग पर जाएं, जिस तरीके से मैंने बताया कि अटेस्टेशन बाई गजेटेड ऑफिसर, इन सारी जटिल प्रक्रियाओं को ख़त्म किया, इसी तरीके से मेरा मानना है कि ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस में भी ऐसी जो जटिल समस्याएं आड़े आती थीं उनका भी खात्मा किया गया है और आज हम 63 नंबर पर हैं। प्रधानमंत्री जी का विजन मेक इन इंडिया का हो या और भी कोई पॉलिसी हो, क्योंकि सारी बातों को बोलना लिमिटेड समय में बहुत मुश्किल है, लेकिन इसका कहीं ना कहीं असर पड़ा है। हमारा इकोसिस्टम बदला है। ग्लोबल इनोवेशन इंडेक्स की अगर हम बात करें तो उसमें 2015 में भारत का 81वां स्थान था और आज 35 पायदान की उछाल के साथ भारत 46वें नंबर पर पहुंचा है। ग्लोबल इनोवेशन इंडेक्स वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जारी करता है। तो जब मैं इसके बारे में पढ़ रहा था तो उसी के समय मेरे दिमाग में एक और बात आया। पेटेंट ग्रांटिंग में इंडिया में बहुत टाइम लगता है और नंबर ऑफ पेटेंट को लेके ये रैंकिंग भी मैटर करता है। कितना इनोवेशन हो रहा है, इसको कैसे क्वांटिफाई किया जाएगा। जिस तरीके से पासपोर्ट, कितना समय लगता था पासपोर्ट को मिलने में, उस समय ऐसा लगता था कि पासपोर्ट एक प्रिविलेज है। अभी वो दिन दूर हो गए हैं और पासपोर्ट आपको बहुत कम समय में, ऑलमोस्ट विद इन ए मंथ आप एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं आपको पासपोर्ट मिल जाए। तो इसके बाद ऐसी ही व्यवस्था आने वाले समय में पेटेंट एग्जामिन करने के लिए भी आने वाली है। अगर हम उसके पेटेंट में कितना टाइम लगता था उसके ऊपर प्रकाश डालें तो 2017 में 64 मंथ्स लगता था पेटेंट को ग्रांट होने में इंडिया में। ये धीरे धीरे घटते आज 2020 का अगर आंकड़े की बात करें तो ये 42 मंथ्स तक आ गया है। जबकि अगर विकसित देशों की बात करें, चीन, अमेरिका और जापान, तो वहाँ पर ये 14 से 15 महीने है। जिस तरीके से पासपोर्ट आपको विद इन ए मंथ मिल रहा है, मुझे लगता है कि वो दिन दूर नहीं है जब पेटेंट भी ग्रांट 1 से 2 वर्ष की अवधि या उसके बीच में या उससे पहले भी आपको हो जाएगा। जब हम भारत की बात करते हैं तो जनसंख्या के लिहाज से हम विश्व के दूसरे सबसे बड़े देश हैं और दूसरे शब्दों में कहें तो हर 5वां व्यक्ति इस दुनिया में भारतीय है। तो बहुत सारे लोग आश्चर्य करते हैं कि इतने सारे इंस्टीट्यूशन क्यों खोले जाना है, जो हैं उन्हीं की क्वालिटी के ऊपर कंसंट्रेशन करना चाहिए। लेकिन वो लोग भूल जाते हैं कि बाकी और लोग, जब हर 5वां व्यक्ति भारतीय है तो जब अगर भारत का विकास होगा तो दुनिया का विकास तो ऑटोमेटिकली होगा। इसलिए कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग जरूरी है। और हमारे पहले जो पूर्व वक्ताओं ने जो बातें बोली कि हर साल 2014 के बाद से एक IIM और एक IIT को खोला गया है, तो ये क्यों जरूरी है? इसलिए जरूरी है, हमें कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग भी करना है। विश्व हमें आज उम्मीद की नज़रों से देखता है। मैं ज़्यादा कुछ उसके बारे में नहीं बोलूँगा। मानव जनित कई ऐसी परिस्थितियाँ आई जहाँ पर हमें भारतीय नागरिकों को इवैक्यूएट करना पड़ा। हमने सिर्फ भारतीय नागरिकों को ही नहीं, विश्व के अन्य देशों के नागरिकों को भी, भारतीय नागरिकों के साथ साथ उनको वहाँ से इवैक्यूएट करके वसुधैव कुटुंबकम का जो एक परिचय दिया है। और इसीलिए विश्व आज हमसे एक बहुत उम्मीदों के साथ देखता है। प्रधानमंत्री जी ने जो बात की है, उनका विजन क्या है? उनका विजन है कि नया भारत एक डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म पर खड़ा होगा। उस डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म से क्या चेंजेस आए हैं, एक मैं अपना पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस आपके साथ साझा करता हूँ। अभी 7 जुलाई की बात है, मेरे पास मोटरसाइकिल विद गियर का जो ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस था वो 2018 में मैंने लिया था, लेकिन LMB के लिए अप्लाई करने के लिए मैंने अभी अप्लाई किया है। तो मुझे पता नहीं था कि ऐसा होने वाला है। जैसे ही मैंने डॉक्टर सर्टिफिकेट सर्टिफाइंग मी कि मैं फिट फॉर ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस हूँ, मैंने सबमिट किया, अपलोड किया, और उसके बाद मुझे ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस, लर्नर लाइसेंस ड्राइविंग टेस्ट से एग्जम्प्ट किया। वो क्यों किया? क्योंकि मैंने पहले ही वहाँ पे एक ऑप्शन सिलेक्ट कर लिया था कि आपके पास पहले से ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस है। तो जो ट्रैफिक रूल्स हैं उसकी लिटरेसी का टेस्ट तो मैंने उसी समय दे दिया था, एंड दैट वाज समवेयर इन द डिजिटल रिकॉर्ड। तो मुझे उस टेस्ट से एग्जम्प्ट कर दिया, और जैसे ही मैंने फ़ी का पेमेंट किया तो मुझे सिर्फ और सिर्फ जो फ़ी है लर्नर लाइसेंस को इशू करने की वो पे करनी पड़ी, और वो 50 रुपीज़ माइनस। तो मुझे लगा कि मैं एग्जम्प्ट हो गया हूँ, लर्नर लाइसेंस के टेस्ट से मुझे अभी वहाँ जाना नहीं पड़ेगा। मैंने ये प्रक्रिया 1:30 बजे पूरी की दिन में, और शाम को लगभग 3:10 के अराउंड मेरे मोबाइल में मैसेज आता है कि आप अपना लर्नर लाइसेंस डाउनलोड कर सकते हैं और आपका ये OTP है। तो ये मुझे पता नहीं था, जब मैं गया देखा तो फिर इसके बाद मैंने और सारी, तो इसलिए मैं कहता हूँ कि देश में काफ़ी कुछ बदल गया है और बहुत कुछ बदल रहा है, और आने वाले दिनों में बहुत कुछ बदलेगा। और प्रधानमंत्री जी की एक विशेषता जो मुझे लगता है कि उन्हें दूसरों से अलग करती है कि जन भागीदारी को कैसे बढ़ाया जाए, और ख़ास तौर से युवाओं का इंक्लूजन कैसे हो। एक कार्यक्रम है चैंपियंस फॉर चेंज 2017 में ऑर्गेनाइज किया गया था, उसमें प्रधानमंत्री जी पूरे दिन बैठे, उसमें युवाओं लोगों को बुलाया गया था और उन्होंने पूरे दिन प्रेजेंटेशंस को देखा, और उसके बाद वो यहीं नहीं रुका। उसके बाद जो आइडियाज़ थे, उनके आइडिएटर थे, उनको रिलीवेंट और संबंधित मंत्रालयों के साथ संबंध किया गया, और उसके बाद और भी युवाओं की भागीदारी कैसे बढ़े, यंग्स को कैसे हम पॉलिसी में लाएं, पॉलिसी मेकिंग का वो कैसे हिस्सा बने। वेरियस मिनिस्ट्रीज इंटर्नशिप प्रोग्राम ऑफर कर रहे हैं आज की डेट में। और अगर मैं ओवरऑल कहना चाहूँ कि प्रधानमंत्री जी क्या चाहते हैं, प्रधानमंत्री जी का विजन क्या है, जिसको मैं लेमैन की भाषा में बोलूँ तो प्रधानमंत्री जी ये चाहते हैं कि जैसे हमारे एयरपोर्ट हैं, रेलवे स्टेशन भी हमारे वैसे ही हो जाएं, और कुछ रेलवे स्टेशन जो बिल्कुल एयरपोर्ट के जैसे दिख रहे हैं उनका अभी रिसेंटली इनॉग्रेशन हुआ है, और ये बिना युवाओं की भागीदारी के बिना नहीं हो सकता है। और मैं सभी लोगों से रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि हम अपनी अपनी जिम्मेदारी समझ के देश के विकास की यात्रा में भागीदार बने। और देश सेवा प्रधानमंत्री जी कैसे समझते हैं, वो फिट इंडिया के बारे में बोलते हैं। अगर हम फिट इंडिया, अपने आप को फिट रखते हैं, वो भी देश की बहुत बड़ी सेवा है, क्योंकि अगर हम फिट रह रहे हैं तो अस्पताल में लगने वाली लाइन को छोटा कर रहे हैं, उसके साथ साथ मेडिकल रिसोर्सेज हैं उनको भी बचा रहे हैं, क्योंकि मेडिकल रिसोर्स एनी रिसोर्सेज, एनी टाइप ऑफ रिसोर्सेज आर लिमिटेड ओनली इन दिस कंट्री। तो अगर हम फिट रह के मेडिकल रिसोर्सेज बचा रहे हैं तो देश के लिए भी एक बहुत बड़ी सेवा है। तो ये एक छोटी छोटी सेवा भी देश की सेवा है, ये हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी का मूल मंत्र है। तो मैं अंत में बस यही कहना चाहूँगा कि जितनी आशाएं हार से नहीं मरती हैं, उतनी आशाएं कभी कभी संदेह के घेरों में मर जाती हैं। इसीलिए मैं आप सभी लोगों को ये जो किताब है, ये किताब रिकमेंड करता हूँ कि कि इस किताब में ऐसी जन कल्याणकारी बहुत सारी योजनाओं का जिक्र है। आप इसके बारे में पढ़िए और देश की विकास की यात्रा में आप कैसे सहयोग कर सकते हैं उसके बारे में आप लोग जानिए और दूसरों को भी बताइए। ये बदलता हुआ भारत है और हम सब लोग इसकी विकास की यात्रा के भागीदार बने। इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ मैं अपनी वाणी को विराम देता हूँ। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Mr. Mohit Mishra. Now I'd like to invite Professor P.K. Iyer, Dean PRBR, to welcome our distinguished guest.
Thank you, Ankit. Good evening to you all. It's my great honor to welcome Professor Shamika Ravi, who is here to deliver a lecture on this book, Modi at 20 Dreams Meet Delivery. So I'll just give a brief introduction. Of course, our CV is quite long. I just got a few points from the net. So if I miss out something, please excuse me. So presently, Professor Shamika Ravi, she's the Vice President, Economic Policy, Observer Research Foundation. However, her research interests are in the area of economics of development. Additionally, she is also into working in areas of finance, health, urbanization, and gender-related issues. Besides being a visiting professor at leading business and management schools across India, she is also the member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India. She is also the non-resident senior fellow of the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institute, Washington, D.C. And she's spending a lot of time, of course, in a lot of other activities related to the progress of the country. She is also a major contributor to one of the chapters of this book, and we hope to hear from her about her contribution and probably also what this book is all about. So thank you once again for coming to IITGuwahati. And on behalf of the community, we invite you once again, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Namaskar. Thank you so much for coming. As economists, we perfectly understand the opportunity cost of attending any event is you could have been doing something perhaps more productive, but I'm really grateful that you have taken the time out. Thank you, Director Sir, for this opportunity and this invitation. Very gracious of each of you to have put this together. It truly is an honor. Well, I'll tell you, my chapter is a bit distinct from the others in the sense that I bring what I know. I know data. So what I do is I bring the lens of empirical analysis. So there's going to be a lot of econometrics that I'm going to talk about, but nothing technical. I will only basically show you results to convince you why I believe what I call as micro revolutions. Why are they micro revolutions? Because these are truly changes that are affecting ordinary people. Right? So that is where I'm not going to limit myself to a few macro indicators, which is what economists are usually accused of. We talk about inflation, fiscal deficit, perhaps GDP growth, and then we limit ourselves. No, this will be about real transformations. And I'm going to highlight 5 in particular. Let me start out by first saying why this is such an enormous transformation that has happened. And in some sense, what we are seeing today, or what we have seen in the last 8 years, in fact, the first 5 years of Prime Minister Modi, is a consolidation of setting up of a basic platform. This is the larger architecture. And though while I call it the welfare architecture, as young students and hopefully some of you interested in businesses, you will also appreciate that Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile, the 3 combined, is creating a platform on which not only social welfare is mounted, which is what you're familiar with, but a lot of business solutions are mounted on it. A lot of the agriculture, ag-tech industry, for instance, and I teach in business school, a very significant number of my own graduates are today looking into agriculture technology, or how can they improve either access to information, access to improvements in inputs, just raising efficiency, just raising productivity, etc. Then you know about financial inclusion, how much banking is now being done through mobile telephony. The fact that Aadhaar, now all of you are perhaps very well familiar with the fact that Aadhaar and the bank account, the Jan Dhan, these are largely on the back of government initiatives, right? So Jan Dhan is almost 80%, 85% on the back of public sector banks. And for those of you who appreciate areas of finance, you will know that setting up of bank account is also costly for the bank. And especially if these are accounts in which not too many transactions are happening, private sector banks have typically stayed away from it. So Jan Dhan has mostly happened on the back of public sector banks. That's number one. Aadhaar, the story is pretty well known. It is a unique ID, but in many ways, Aadhaar has a greater promise of what we are currently seeing. But address proof is a very big impediment. In fact, up until 2014, address proof used to be one of the biggest impediments to accessing finance, accessing jobs, accessing electricity, many things. Aadhaar also functions at that. So Jan Dhan and Aadhaar happens on the back of government initiative, but what is important to note is mobile is mostly on the back of private enterprise. These are our private telecoms that have brought together and made it possible for every corner of the country to be connected today. So whether you go to Nubra Valley, you go to Kutch, you go to areas of Nagaland, you go to areas of Andaman, Nicobar, etc., everybody has access to mobile connectivity. And while things are happening and we take them for granted, you have to appreciate what a tectonic shift it is in the growth and development of a young economy like ours. So JAM collectively, the way to read this graph is these are at the district level. If you plot all districts, more than 95% of your districts are showing very high number, almost universal, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile. And this is, by the way, 14, 15, 16. So now obviously these numbers are closer to 9,900 in many ways. Now, let's look at the second biggest transformation, which now, of course, there is a value judgment to it. I consider them because what I believe are fundamental for the next 100 years of this country. Swachh Bharat mission, which was very eloquently explained, from your friend, very, very impressive. Universal access to toilets is such a menial thing. In some sense, nobody wanted to talk about it. As development economists, we did talk about it. But I must also confess to you that we would go to places, we would talk about it, but many times it was discounted as it's not such a big problem. Now, globally, remember, open defecation was 12%. This is 2014. In India, it was greater than 40%. So it was very rampant. But at the same time, when we would talk about it, we were also told, and you might not believe this today, but we were also told many times that, yeah, Dr. Ravi, you think it is important, but in India, going to the fields is a collective social exercise. People like to tell stories and exchange and complete today what you and I would say nonsense. But that is how change happens in many ways from the top as well. That sometimes what you fundamentally believe through the research, because it in fact impacts your health indicators directly. Infant mortality and neonatal mortality are directly linked to hygiene and clean drinking water. When you have open defecation, basically fecal matter finds its way into water, and so you have very high IMR, NMR. So the data is not in any way unclear. We have known this for a long time. As researchers, we have been asking for it for many years. And yet, it really took a mission from the top, which is why we say that Swachh Bharat mission is truly a case study in terms of leadership and governance. And a term which you must familiarize yourself as students with, something called political entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not limited to the markets alone. Political leaders, through their entrepreneurship, can transform societies and economies. And that's exactly what we have seen in terms of the Swachh Bharat mission. You all appreciate that it is not the financing which kept us back. After all, we did have the money. We've had high growth now for 30 years. It was in many ways not just the fundamental belief, but you also have to understand that this massive administrative inertia, the kind of excellent examples he was giving you, how difficult it was to get driving license, etc. But imagine the administrative inertia when you have to mobilize bureaucracy of the whole country towards building toilet for that absolute last person in the village. So you mobilizing that kind of massive bureaucracy, which is typically quite lethargic and immune to a lot of requests from citizens, requires this kind of leadership. In fact, there is an excellent case study. If you read the chapter, there's an excellent article out in the Lancet. This came out quite some time back, talking about personally how the Prime Minister moved this turned it into a mass movement. right from symbolically holding the broom to basically chasing everyone, asking people to adopt constituency villages and so on and so forth. So this turning it into a mass movement is truly a remarkable case study. Now, while we know the impact of open defecation for your Swachh Bharat mission, access to toilets, we know the impact on health, we know the impact it has had in terms of hygiene. What is relatively unknown or relatively less known is the impact it has had on crime. And it was never meant to be a women's scheme. It was open defecation. But a lot of the schemes under Prime Minister Modi have invariably found their way into benefiting the large female population of this. And you can see that the women are rewarding him at the elections repeatedly. And I will also tell you a little bit about elections. But why did it impact women? Because open defecation, or if you talk about toilets, are fundamentally a gendered problem. Right? Not having access means, the men can go anywhere. But again, the research has existed for a very long time, but it really did take a movement. Sexual harassment within the first few years fell by 22%. Rape incidents fell by 14%. These are massive changes. These are huge changes. You also appreciate the fact that changing habits takes a long period. So what you do in many cases is follow the principle of you build and they will come. So there is a positive reinforcement in the system, that it is not initially. There was a lot of blame game that you're building all this. It's a real infrastructure project, real estate project. People aren't using them. But you have to appreciate that habits take time. And the kind of positive reinforcement, the kind of impact, particularly on young girls and women, it is leading to a mass scale adoption of these good practices. All right? So you have to put all of these together to appreciate what a big change it is. The third most important thing which I felt, and while we are still at the perhaps hopefully fag end of the COVID pandemic, though one never knows about mutants, but the pandemic response in this country has truly been remarkable. In the sense, most Indians forget that we have just come out of poverty. We still have absolute poverty of around 5%. Absolute. We are a very large country. We are a resource poor country. So against that backdrop, while the media would like you to believe, and many of you believe, because I face the same bias, we are comparing ourselves, oh, Germany did this and Sweden did this, the US did this, why aren't we doing it? Because we are nowhere close to them as far as basic resources are concerned. And resource, at the end of the day, is a binding constraint. You can't wish it away. So now imagine the kind of mobilizing of core infrastructure, building testing capacity. Every district now, within the first 6 months, developed an ICMR approved certified testing labs. We didn't have. In fact, many states didn't have. Right in the beginning, if you look at the first quadrant, if you look at the first beginning of the pandemic. Then the technology, we are one of the very few countries outside the G7 or the OECD which is a developer and manufacturer of vaccines. So in that sense, while we have been called the pharmacy to the world, and for good reason, 70% of vaccines globally come from India. But faced with this kind of a pandemic, obviously the pressures were very real. Right from production in-house to development in-house, obviously was a huge challenge, but in many ways, on a hindsight, we know that it all happened in real time. And to a large extent, even if the technology exists and it is developed and you manufacture, how do you govern? How do you administer the fact that within 9 months, India had administered over 1 billion doses? Now, of course, there are all kinds of records being set here. That is what happens when things work in India, records automatically get set because we are such a large country. But you have to appreciate the kind of effort that goes into mobilizing in a real time what has happened. This graph from the World in Data, because I studied this whole thing very closely during the pandemic. Look at the number, look at the amount India tested compared to a lot of many richer, far richer countries like South Africa. You look at Thailand, Philippines, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico. These are much richer countries. They are multiples of our per capita income. But we ended up testing a lot more because that is the kind of resources which were committed and used. This is the kind of vaccination drive. Within 9 months, you saw over 1 billion doses. Now, on a hindsight, yes, but we were also lucky because the leadership, people have innate faith, because of which we did not face the kind of vaccine hesitancy that many developed countries did. The US, a lot of Western Europe, the richest parts of the world, have faced riots after riots, unrest after unrest, protest after protest. We have not had those. And to some extent, it is because there is innate trust. There is innate trust that this is happening for the right reason. Modi ji has taken Covaxin in AIMS. He's the first one. We'll all go and take it. Of course, it's a very large country, so there's always a little bit of friction everywhere. By and large, this is a miracle in itself. Now, while objectively we are saying, okay, all these wonderful things have happened, do people recognize it? And here I'm going to share with you a research paper we published. This was a peer-reviewed journal. We published it last year itself. The Bihar elections. Remember, Bihar elections were held within 6 months of a very stringent national lockdown, when many migrants went back home. Bihar is the poorest state of the union. It's our poorest state. And you know who migrates? The poorest districts is where migration happens. And you all remember that when the pandemic, when the national lockdown was declared, what a large number of reverse migration happened from the western industrialized part of the country towards UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., the eastern rural parts. And then here comes the litmus test, which is the state election within 6 months. And if you remember, almost all experts who were analyzing elections, psephologists, said that there is no way the incumbent government in those places are coming back, because migrants have suffered, the poor have suffered the most, so on and so forth. This is actually odds ratios. These odds ratios are telling you that the poorer the constituency, and how do you do this analysis, by the way? You combine the Election Commission of India data at the constituency level. You have to, of course, merge it with district. So, to those of you interested, I'm happy to explain later. You marry that with poverty data from NFHS, right? The kind of asset ownership, etc. When you combine poverty and election, what do you see? The poorer the constituency or areas from where you had the maximum migrants were the ones who were most likely to vote for the incumbent government. This is at the end of your stringent national lockdown. And why did that happen? So when you pull apart the data and you try to understand, then you see this is the beauty of JAM. Real-time cash transfers. People are getting off the trains, they're getting the cash. Within 2 weeks of announcement of a national lockdown, the governments are getting mobilized to give cash in hand. Not just cash, there was a lot of other forms of relief. Again, appreciate that India very successfully averted a humanitarian crisis. The world was waiting for a humanitarian crisis to unfold because, yes, we do have 5% absolute poverty when absolute number is a very large number. With per capita income of $2,100, we are just gotten over poverty country. So for a vulnerable population like that, you can imagine what would have unfolded if we did not have these kind of real-time transfers of food grains, of cash, etc. So all kinds of relief. Last counting, there were 418 direct benefit transfers across 56 ministries which were mobilized to make sure that these things are reaching on time. And that is what people reward. People reward with their votes. People reward with their feet. Right? So the pandemic response has been exemplary. However, and this is something I want to sensitize you to, there is a narrative around the pandemic as well. What does this data tell you? Now, all the data I'm showing you are publicly available. So I also encourage those of you who have inclination, who are interested in some of this, to try them out. You should tell your own stories and do some of this own analysis. This is GDELT data from Google. This is telling you what is the tone of media when it covers these different countries. This is global media in more than 100 languages which are on Google. So it's not Indian media, it is not Chinese, it's every media which is on Google. So global media, okay? Look at the kind of coverage China gets. This is from the beginning of the pandemic, from April onwards up until 9 months, until when I analyzed the data last. Are you seeing what is happening in terms of building of narratives globally in terms of media? You see how democracies are struggling, the media coverage in all democracies, it's not just India, Sweden, Germany, United States, these are large democracies. They're all getting largely negative coverage. Oh, countries are struggling, lots of excess deaths, poor people suffering, there's a constant story that is emerging. We are hearing wonderful, glowing things about China all across the world. What I'm trying to tell you is, pandemic also has, and it's not limited to the pandemic. Now it goes beyond, it's very much a part of managing narratives. Governments are getting into this because this is a game that has already started. Earlier it used to be within the realm of finance. You made stories viral because the share prices reflected the performance of a firm, so there were stories that went viral. This whole area of research is called narrative economics. How stories are planted, how stories propagate, and there's a lot of learning from neurology, because the way information spread has a lot to do with research in neurology. But this is fascinating. You have to understand that when you pick up a newspaper and read something, don't just accept it blindly. You must question the intent, you must question the data, and you must know this fundamentally, that at the back of it all, there is a lot of game plan being unfolded. The fourth most important transformation, which I think has been brought about under Prime Minister Modi, is women's leadership. Now, while I've been studying women voters and the way women, India has had a 16 times increase in women contesting elections in the last 40 years. 16 times. Now, globally, if you pick up any global media, you'll hear that democracy is in a recession. Not if you look at Indian data. Women are voting more and more. Women are contesting much, much more. If you look at women voting for development very highly. But this is something different. This looks at how many questions are women MPs asking in the parliament. So we are not just looking at number of MPs. We are looking at when they are elected, how do they engage? How many questions are they asking? Are they tabling private member bills? Are they initiating debates, etc.? So this is truly a mark of performance. It is not just saying there are few women or more women. It's not just the numbers. You have to go beyond the numbers. And what do you see? You see that if you look at the average number of questions, that red block tells you average median number of questions per female, and the blue bar is male. Obviously, 16th Lok Sabha, men, there is no difference between men and women in the median, right? But that is just overall Lok Sabha, male, female. What is happening is a large part of it is driven by the remarkable bunch of women BJP members of parliament. There is something happening within that political party because of which what you are seeing, that orange bar are women BJP MPs. They asked on an average, so per person, per woman, 355 questions through the term compared to 58 from the Congress when they were in opposition. And you might say, well, when they are in opposition, of course they should ask questions. But what is now remarkable, and that is what this research proves, that they are asking almost equivalent number of questions when they are in the government. They are asking questions of their own government. That is the mark of true performance. That women MPs of BJP were not only asking questions when they were in opposition, they are asking as many questions compared to men, women, their own party, other party, everywhere. They are just asking a lot of questions. Why is this important? Because if you follow the literature of political science, representative democracy, which is what an MP is meant to be, you are meant to represent the interest of your constituents. And you have to make the government accountable to your constituents. That is what asking questions means. Or that is what initiating debates, etc. means. And they are doing it. Which means there is a setting up of a corporate culture in the institution, and you very well appreciate this is coming from the top. What are the questions they are asking? Well, health, education, road transport, highways. They are asking about jobs, MSMEs. They are asking about Panchayati Raj, youth affairs, textiles. These are things which matter to ordinary people across. So, women's empowerment, therefore, not just measured in terms of numbers. Yes, there has been a growth in numbers, but that is not the fun story. The real story is women becoming much more productive in that sense, much better leaders. Final story is on Gujarat. And the reason is because I had not traditionally studied Gujarat, and that is where the question of when I was asked to write, I had analyzed only the last 15 whatever years of national economy. So when I was asked, well, what do you think of Gujarat? I started looking at the data as a combination of growth and development. What does this data tell you? On the y-axis, you have growth in per capita income. So that is economic well-being. What do you have on the x-axis? Reduction in neonatal deaths. How many babies die within the first 28 days of birth? Why is it an important metric? Number one, it is a sustainable development goal that us, along with other countries, have signed up for. We have to reduce this number. Second, it's a very good proxy for what is the institutional healthcare available to an ordinary citizen, and mothers and babies in particular. What do you see? First of all, a positive relationship, meaning with growth, most states, these dots, each of them is state of the union. You are seeing that there are very few states. While on the whole they are growing and improving things, there are very few states that fall in that first quadrant. That first quadrant, and namely Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. Gujarat increased its per capita income by 300% from 2001 to 18, so within 17 years. But what did it also do? It is one of the very few states which reduced its neonatal deaths by more than 50%. So you want to combine the two. Everybody knows that Gujarat has done very well economically. But that is not the story, that is not the full story. What you have to eventually talk in a democracy is not just economic growth. It has to be inclusive growth, the kind of things we're all talking about. It has to be about development and specifically indicators. So we're talking about growth with development. So with that, I basically, I've given you a snapshot of 5 stories. I highly encourage you to read the chapters and also give in comments. Please do write in if you have any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am, for delivering the much awaited expert address. That was a detailed and inspiring. Your presentation was a true example of data speak louder than words. And now I would like to invite once again Professor PK here to come on stage for vote of thanks.
Thank you once again, Ankit. So on behalf of the organizing committee, once again, Professor Ravi, I thank you for delivering this wonderful lecture. I'm sure there are many questions. I myself had 2 or 3 questions. Probably we'll discuss over a cup of tea. So there is also a cup of tea outside. So everyone present here, please join us for a cup of tea. Before we end, I would also like to thank Mr. Akhilesh Mishra ji from Prime Minister's office. We have been continuously in touch with him. He has been guiding us on how to organize this event and what has to be done, what should we do over the past 1 month, I think more than a month. So I think without his support and guidance, it would not have been possible to organize this event. I also thank Professor Sukanya Sharma, Professor Pahi and Mohit for their enthusiasm and preparing slides, getting ready for this event. I think you 3 really worked hard. Thank you very much on behalf of the institute that you took up this job to present your views on this book. And going through this book itself was a challenge in this short time. So once again, thank you, for your efforts. I also thank Professor Sitaram for guiding us and leading this event. I think it would not have been possible if sir, you would not have taken this lead. Thank you very much for this. And the team from CET and the PRBR staff, you all also worked hard to put in this event in a very short time. So thank you very much for your active involvement in organizing this event. And finally, the faculty, the staff, the research scholars, I see many of them here, for participating in this event. And Professor Ravi will be here. So if you have any questions, please do share and discuss with her. So once again, thank you very much. And I invite you all for a cup of tea. But before going out, I request all the speakers to please come on the stage. We'll have a group photo quickly. Yeah. We can bring this here, yes, I think?
No, sir.
No, sir.